During a thunderstorm, a doctor gave a ride to an orphan with a baby in her arms. But as soon as he saw a photo that fell out of her pocket, he nearly lost his power of speech. We welcome you to our channel and invite you to watch the video with our new original story. Emiliano woke up in the middle of the night from his wife gently shaking his shoulder. He woke up with tears welling up, covered in sweat. And for the first few moments after waking, he still saw her, Paloma. A stern, sad face, condemning eyes. "You were tossing and turning in your sleep again," Adriana explained, tenderly stroking the man's hair, cheeks, shoulders. Her touches made it easier. "Another bad dream?" "About that time, yes, when you served." Emiliano nodded his head. Yes, he had been a military doctor for 7 whole years. He worked under contract in hotspots. He had seen so much. But what troubled him were not echoes of his service, but what made him flee from his familiar world into hell. He thought it would help. It helped, of course, but only partially. Still, Paloma periodically appeared to him in his dreams, stern, condemning, suffering. Today, she was even close to panic, and it looked terrible. Emiliano's thoughts after such dreams always returned to Isabella, the daughter he was forced to give up. He was told to forget her, but how to do that? When Emiliano saw Isabella for the last time, she was only 3 years old. A little girl with clear, light blue eyes, chestnut curls framing a sweet little face. She didn't understand what was happening yet. The girl just wanted Daddy to pick her up and rock her, or take her for a walk in the nearby park. And she also hoped that at least Daddy would explain to her where Mommy had suddenly disappeared, because everyone else avoided answering, changed the subject, or simply cried. Grandmother, grandfather, and aunt, whom Isabella loved very much but still less than her parents, they suddenly changed a lot, became sad and angry, and they began to convince Isabella that her daddy was a bad person, simply terrible. He needed to be forgotten, erased from memory forever. It was better to stay away from such a person. Isabella resisted, defended her father, thereby causing even more activity from relatives. The more confidently she argued, the more fiercely the relatives proved that Emiliano was a monster and the most terrible villain in the world, worse than any character from cartoons. And yet, once upon a time, this was a happy, close-knit family. Paloma and Emiliano got married right after graduating from universities. They bought an apartment with a mortgage. Parents on both sides helped. They got their first jobs, worked, paid off the mortgage with help from relatives, enjoyed independence in each other. Emiliano loved Paloma. He loved her with a quiet, calm, somehow cozy love, without excessive passions and emotions, like a dear and close person. It seemed that they had always been together, that they had a perfect family, and ahead awaited them a long, happy life, and then joint warm old age surrounded by children and grandchildren. Only fate decided otherwise. That's what she prepared for the newlyweds. 3 years after the wedding, the family was joined by a new member, daughter Isabella. The joy of the young parents and newly minted grandmothers and grandfathers knew no bounds. Paloma's parents were especially happy. They had an older daughter, Valeria. She had been unsuccessfully treated for infertility for a long time, even did IVF, and still nothing worked out for her and her husband. So Paloma's parents had long dreamed of grandchildren. They waited for them. They even bought toys for non-existent babies. And then such a wonderful miracle. A little charming granddaughter, a gift from heaven. Isabella turned out to be a wonderful child. As they say, a gift. Colic hardly bothered her. Teeth came through on schedule and painlessly. In the first years of life, unlike other children, Isabella didn't catch colds and didn't get sick. She slept peacefully at night, ate well, delighted her parents with new skills and a charming smile. When Emiliano looked at his daughter, his heart melted with love and tenderness. The man felt, for this little one he would move mountains, get a star from the sky, do absolutely anything for her. With the appearance of the child, Emiliano understood that children are the most powerful motivator for parents, a stimulus to move forward, develop, become stronger. Emiliano dreamed that his beloved girls, Paloma and Isabella, would want for nothing. He worked as a surgeon in a local hospital and therefore had the opportunity to take additional shifts. Emiliano had a dream, to save money for a family trip to the sea. Isabella had never been there, and he and his wife hadn't vacationed on a warm coast for a long time. First the wedding, then the mortgage, then the birth of the baby. Somehow there was never enough money and time. And for this very family vacation, Emiliano worked, toiled in 1.5 to 2 shifts, which is very hard for a surgeon. He returned home late with hands trembling from fatigue and a buzzing head. And still, if his daughter wasn't asleep yet, he found the strength to play with her or even go for a walk when the weather allowed. It happened on a cool morning of Mexican winter. Emiliano had returned from work late the night before and literally fell into sleep. The man dreamed of sleeping until at least 10 for the whole week. He had a long-awaited day off the next day, but Paloma woke him up at 8. "Sorry, I know you're very tired. The only day off and all that, but you need to drive Isabella and me to the puppet theater for a morning show. Remember, I told you about it on Monday?" Emiliano nodded. He smiled, said he would drink coffee now and go warm up the car. The family's old Seat, which the man still dreamed of replacing with something newer, more beautiful and comfortable. But there wasn't enough money yet. His head was buzzing, dots were flickering before his eyes, but Emiliano washed his face with cold water and made himself strong coffee. He smiled as he watched Paloma get Isabella ready. Hair curled overnight on soft curlers, a fluffy light pink dress like a princess's, and even jewelry, a bracelet, necklace, and tiny earrings. And how Isabella loved all this. Emiliano was amazed, only 3 years old, and already this purely feminine desire to be beautiful and elegant was showing. Paloma also looked wonderful. Despite the fact that maternity leave had ended, she hadn't gone back to work yet. The spouses had decided that Paloma would stay with their daughter until school, because Isabella, who had delighted her parents with excellent health before kindergarten, started getting sick often after enrolling in that institution. What employer would like an employee constantly running off on sick leave? So Paloma stayed with the child. She rarely went out anywhere, but when such an opportunity arose, like now, to the theater, the woman gladly put on things she hadn't worn in everyday life for a long time. Skirts, heels, fancy blouses, and did light makeup. Emiliano enjoyed watching these transformations of sweet and cozy Paloma into a real beauty. So it was on that fateful morning. Emiliano frankly admired his girls and mentally thanked fate for having such a wonderful, loving family. That morning, he was truly happy for the last time. Happy, relatively carefree, calm. And then, everything changed, literally turned upside down. There were few cars on the road on Sunday morning. Emiliano was driving and talking about something with Paloma, who was comfortably seated next to him in the passenger seat. Isabella sat in the back, securely fastened in a child seat. Sometimes the little one would also insert a remark into her parents' dialogue. For her 3 years, she spoke very clearly, and in general was a surprisingly smart girl, which made her happy father proud. That truck. It appeared from around the corner unexpectedly, and this enormous vehicle was flying in the oncoming lane, straight at Emiliano and his family. The man felt icy horror. One word flashed through his head: everything. And yet Emiliano tried to avoid the impact. He acted apparently automatically, obeying some ancient instincts. In general, the situation could only be partially saved. A moment later, a powerful blow shook the family car. Everything around started spinning, whirling. Outside the window, sometimes the sky flashed, sometimes something dark and huge, causing complete darkness to reign in the cabin for seconds. Emiliano didn't feel pain, but he was nauseated by all this spinning and flickering. And he was also afraid not for himself, but for Paloma and Isabella. It was so terrible to know that they were in danger and not be able to do anything about it. And then Emiliano no longer thought about anything. He lost consciousness. The man woke up in the hospital. He noted to himself that his right leg was in a cast, felt the bandage on his head, moved his limbs, his arms and legs obeyed. That was good, meaning at least his spine was intact. He thought about his wife and daughter. He became very scared. What was wrong with them? What condition were they in? What if something irreparable had happened? Icy horror gripped Emiliano's heart. Goosebumps ran down his spine. He had to find out what happened to his loved ones. After some time, a nurse appeared in the ward. Seeing that Emiliano had come to his senses, She was delighted and was about to run for the doctor, but the man stopped her. "Where is my daughter? Where is my wife? What's wrong with them?" "I don't know." The nurse shook her head. "Only you were brought to us from the accident scene. They're probably in another hospital." The uncertainty was frightening. It made him assume the worst. And this state lasted until Emiliano's worried father and mother burst into the intensive care unit. The man was glad to see familiar and dear faces. His parents hugged their son, who was bedridden, and cried, "I can't believe you're alive." "Such a terrible accident," his mother lamented. "Where is Paloma? Where is Isabella? What's wrong with them?" "Isabella is fine. She's with her grandmother and grandfather at Paloma's parents," his father answered. His mother continued to stroke her son's head like a little child all this time. "It's some kind of miracle, but the little girl wasn't hurt at all, just a small scratch on her forehead. They took her to pediatric trauma, examined her, and released her. Don't worry about her." "And Paloma?" Emiliano asked in a trembling voice. A terrible premonition stirred in his soul. His mother and father exchanged glances. Then his father sighed heavily, put his strong palm on his son's shoulder, and answered, "Paloma." They couldn't save her. The injuries were such. The impact hit right where she was sitting. The doctors couldn't do anything. Emiliano didn't want to believe what he had just heard. His father's words stunned him. Everything swam before his eyes again. His ears rang. Before losing consciousness, Emiliano managed to see his mother's worried face as she tried to hold him from falling. Emiliano was recovering quickly, a healthy, young, strong body. The effects of the traumatic brain injury were weakening, bones were healing, but his mental state was much worse. Emiliano didn't believe that Paloma was gone, and also he couldn't imagine life without her. How to be now? And Isabella? Did she already know? If not, then how to tell her about such a thing? The man felt guilt. Terrible, all-consuming, crushing. He was the one behind the wheel that fateful morning. And even though Emiliano followed all the rules, even though the truck driver was established as the culprit of the accident, it was Emiliano who didn't react in time. An investigation was conducted into the accident. Its results greatly intensified Emiliano's feeling of guilt. It turned out that he, as the driver, could have prevented the worst. If he had started avoiding the impact a little earlier, if he had thought to turn in the other direction. Like 99% of drivers, Emiliano instinctively tried to get himself out from under the impact. The investigator explained that this almost always happens. The self-preservation instinct kicks in, normal thing. In addition, Emiliano's condition affected it too. Sleep deprivation, fatigue. As a result, the impact hit the passenger in the front seat, that is, Paloma. Emiliano hated himself after reading the investigation results. A grown, strong man cried when no one was watching. From despair, from awareness of his own guilt, from the impossibility of seeing Paloma. He couldn't even ask her for forgiveness now. His mother visited Emiliano every day. She had long conversations, convincing her son that he wasn't to blame for anything. The truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crashed into you from around the corner. What could you have done? Emiliano just shook his head. Due to his health condition, the man couldn't even attend Paloma's funeral. Everything was organized by her parents. Emiliano tried to call them, but both his mother-in-law and father-in-law kept hanging up. Probably they weren't up to it. And Emiliano, he wanted to ask them for forgiveness, offer financial help, ask about Isabella, how she was, whether they had already told her what happened to her mother. When Emiliano asked his mother about his daughter, she only sighed heavily and immediately changed the subject. But one day Emiliano still insisted. He was already recovering then. Probably that's why his mother decided to tell him. "They won't let us communicate with Isabella," the woman said, lowering her eyes. "They don't want to hear anything about us. They say we should forget our granddaughter, that we'll never see her again. It's because of me. They blame me, and that's why they're angry." "Yes, son, but it's from grief. From shock. Later they'll understand. They'll realize that you weren't to blame for anything." "But I am to blame," Emiliano stubbornly declared, pressing his lips tightly together. "I was behind the wheel. The investigation showed that I could have reduced the consequences of the accident. I just didn't react in time and turned the wrong way." "They're right." "No, they're not right. They should blame the truck driver who fell asleep on the road because he celebrated someone's birthday all night and got behind the wheel in the morning. He sent Paloma to the other world and crippled you, and the court recognized this. They sent him to prison, not you. You're also a victim. Emiliano would have liked to believe his mother's words, but he couldn't. He felt guilt, felt responsibility for what happened to Paloma, and desperately missed his wife. Her quiet voice, meek gaze, gentle touches. When Emiliano was discharged, he immediately went to his wife's parents, although his mother and father tried to dissuade him from this step. Emiliano already knew. His wife's parents blamed him for what happened to Paloma. They hated the person who allowed such a thing to happen. They didn't want to hear anything about him. Emiliano understood them perfectly. He hated himself too. But it was important for him to talk to them, and of course to see Isabella. She was his daughter, their common relative. They would have to somehow reconcile, at least for her sake. Paloma's parents lived in a prestigious area in a beautiful, cozy two-story house. The head of the family owned a business, a company involved in apartment and office renovation. Once the business brought very good income. Now things were going somewhat worse. But still, his father-in-law was a fairly wealthy man. Emiliano respected him for managing to achieve everything himself, with his own mind and hard work. Emiliano always had good relations with his wife's parents. They accepted him immediately. They liked their son-in-law's profession, surgeon. Both had said more than once that they were proud of their daughter's choice. Emiliano was grateful to them for this, because Paloma was still the daughter of fairly wealthy parents, while Emiliano came from an ordinary average family. The guy initially thought that Paloma's parents would be against such a simple son-in-law, but they behaved benevolently and sincerely with him. His father-in-law was especially happy about Emiliano's appearance. He had always dreamed of exactly such a son, smart, purposeful, but fate gave him two wonderful daughters, Valeria, and then 10 years later, Paloma. Usually Emiliano came to his father-in-law's house in a cheerful mood. He knew that he was always welcome here, always expected. Emiliano was greeted with a smile, seated at the table, and heartfelt conversations began. After the accident, the world completely changed. Now everything was different. Emiliano couldn't imagine how to look Paloma's parents in the eyes, what to talk about with them, how to start a conversation. But he needed to see them, ask for forgiveness, explain everything. And then they had his daughter. Valeria, Paloma's older sister, opened the door for Emiliano, looked at him with a contemptuous glance, and let him inside. Well, that was already not bad. Emiliano immediately saw her, Isabella. She was sitting with her grandmother on a blanket spread on the floor, right in the hall. It seemed they were building something with blocks. Noticing her son-in-law, the elderly woman jumped up as if scalded, looked at him with contempt and hatred. Emiliano felt as if struck by lightning. She grabbed Isabella, who had also recognized Daddy and was already reaching her little hands toward him, and hurriedly retreated to another room. "Wait!" Emiliano shouted. He wanted to follow the woman into that very room, but his father-in-law blocked his way. He appeared suddenly, literally materialized out of thin air, but actually quietly came out of the kitchen. His father-in-law was silent. He looked at his son-in-law with such disgust, such burning hatred, that he immediately forgot everything he wanted to say. Emiliano noted that his father-in-law had lost a lot of weight, looked haggard. This grief had dried him up, and the man's face had acquired a gray, earthy tint. And he, Emiliano, was to blame for this too. "Get out of here," the man said dully. "We need to talk. There's nothing for us to talk about. If you had shown up here a week ago or earlier, I wouldn't have left a wet spot of you." "See this?" His father-in-law showed Emiliano his knuckles, which had probably quite recently been beaten to a pulp and were now healing. "I was hitting the wall with my fist from despair and regretting that it was a wall in front of me, not your disgusting face." "So don't hold back," Emiliano suggested. He suddenly thought that he would probably even feel better if Paloma's father hit him and beat him senseless. That would be fair and right. "I don't need legal problems because of you," his father-in-law snorted contemptuously. "Now I've already gotten myself together. I need to be strong, for my wife, for my older daughter, and for my granddaughter. It's no joke to raise a small child." I wanted to talk about Isabella, and there's nothing to talk about her now. You sent her mother to the other world. Do you think the girl will want to see you? Do you think she'll ever forgive? Well, no, I don't want my granddaughter to suffer. To decide whether to love the father who raises her or hate him for depriving her of her mother. There will never be such a person near my granddaughter. Disgusting, cowardly, stupid, never. I don't understand. You're also stupid, his father-in-law shook his head. What's to understand? Isabella will stay with us. We'll raise her. Valeria, she's long dreamed of a child, but it never worked out. And now this tragedy. So Valeria will raise the little girl like her own daughter, Valeria and her husband, and will be nearby. And you don't even come near Isabella now. She hates you. She has no father anymore. You don't exist for her, and for us. I'm her father. Emiliano felt that he was running out of breath. His father-in-law was saying terrible but seemingly fair things, and he had already decided everything for everyone. Emiliano saw, understood. This man didn't intend to change his decision. You'll give up your rights to your daughter, voluntarily yourself. If you wish her well, that's the only thing you can do now. But you'll give them up. I've already found out everything about this procedure. It's not complicated. You'll sign the necessary papers, and that's it. Nothing connects us with you anymore. Isabella is ours. Ours, not yours. You didn't deserve the happiness of being a father. You deprived the little girl of her mother, and now get out. I can't stand to look at you. Emiliano returned to his empty apartment with disheveled feelings. Thoughts swarmed in his head. At first, what his father-in-law proposed seemed monstrous, unthinkable. Isabella, he had seen his daughter. He managed to notice her little eyes flash with joy at meeting her father. And her little hands. The girl was reaching for him. She didn't hate him. His father-in-law had lied. Pain was speaking in him. On the other hand, it was really hard to imagine further life. Isabella would grow up, understand who was to blame for her mother's death. And of course, she would start blaming her father. And in this, his father-in-law was right. The girl would suffer. On one hand, love the person who raises her. On the other, hate him for her mother's death. For the absence of the closest and dearest person in her life. Emiliano grabbed his head. It was literally cracking from heavy thoughts. Emotions overwhelmed him. He saw no way out of the situation. Emiliano tried to see his daughter again. It seemed to him that maybe then he would understand how to proceed, but they no longer let him pass the threshold. His father-in-law declared that the next time Emiliano showed up, they would call the police. And yet Emiliano came again. He didn't know what to do. He didn't live. He existed. He tossed about, didn't sleep at night, felt like some kind of zombie. And his father-in-law carried out his threat, actually called the police. Emiliano was taken to the station. A case was opened against him for harassment. They even left him in a cell for a while. And then his father-in-law showed up with documents that Emiliano needed to sign. It was a renunciation of his daughter. Sign it. Help Isabella. By doing this, you'll do a good deed for her. At least help her with something. If you sign, I'll withdraw the complaint. I won't let the case proceed. You don't need jail time right now. Emiliano wasn't afraid of prison. At that moment, he wasn't worried about his fate at all. Emiliano was in a strange state of altered consciousness, injuries from the accident, loss of his beloved wife, crushing guilt, and now problems with his daughter too. In general, his father-in-law convinced him that it would be better for everyone this way. And Emiliano did it. He renounced Isabella, being completely certain that he was doing the right thing. "What have you done?" his mother reproached her son when she learned about everything. "They're behaving incorrectly. They found someone to blame. What kind of monstrous demand is this? To renounce your daughter? How could you sign such a thing?" "It had to be done," Emiliano replied. He now lived with his parents. Couldn't stay in the family apartment where everything reminded him of Isabella and Paloma. People he loved more than life, and whom he had lost himself. Guilty. His mother and father were only glad that their son was temporarily under their supervision. His condition caused them concern. Emiliano ate almost nothing, but drank a lot, mostly strong drinks. He lost weight, shadows settled under his eyes. At night, Emiliano didn't sleep, and if he dozed off in anxious sleep, he invariably woke up soon with screams. He often dreamed of the moment of the accident. The man tried each time to change something, act differently, but the outcome was always the same. These dreams exhausted Emiliano, took away his last energy. Emiliano didn't know how to live further, and most importantly, why. Guilt pressed down. The impossibility of hugging Paloma and Isabella tormented him. He even thought about ending all these torments at once. Only he felt sorry for his mother and father. Life had turned into eternal torment. Emiliano didn't want anything. He quit his job at the hospital. You can't approach patients in such a condition. He didn't need to harm someone else. Emiliano spent whole days lying on the bed in his bedroom, staring at the ceiling. To avoid thinking about anything, he got drunk. Drunk to unconsciousness. It helped briefly. And then suddenly he found a leaflet in the mailbox. People were needed for contract service, and Emiliano thought this was his chance to escape from the crushing feeling of guilt, despair, hopelessness. Maybe he could still be useful somewhere, be helpful to someone. His mother tried to dissuade him. It was a very dangerous undertaking. It was assumed that Emiliano would serve in so-called hot spots in distant countries. "You're not guilty of anything," she cried. "You did everything for your family. You worked like crazy, didn't get enough sleep. Paloma shouldn't have woken you that morning when you were tired. You could have called a taxi. You're not guilty. The only guilty party is the truck driver. Why are you ruining your life?" But Emiliano had already decided everything for himself. Service. This was a completely special time for Emiliano. He worked as a military doctor, saw everything imaginable, heard everything imaginable. Wounds, pain, suffering, death. All this was near. All this was around. Emiliano focused on doing his job, cutting, stitching, setting bones. During this time, he really didn't think about the past, and this was happiness. Emiliano was in the thick of it. One after another, people died. Colleagues, fellow servicemen, strangers, hell on earth. But Emiliano repeatedly extended his contract. It was easier for him this way. 7 years passed. Emiliano had to return to the familiar world. A wound, hospital. Then a special commission declared him unfit for service. Emiliano returned as a completely different person, having seen much, having realized much. No one was waiting for him in his hometown anymore. His mother had died while Emiliano was serving. His father had moved to his native village closer to his brother. He couldn't bear the loneliness. So Emiliano returned to his empty parental apartment. And memories of that accident, of Paloma, of Isabella, they flooded back again. Now Emiliano was better at dealing with his thoughts and emotions, as if he had grown armor. But when the man thought about his daughter and wife, his heart still painfully clenched. They still visited him in dreams at night. Not every night, of course, but still. And then the man would wake up in cold sweat with parched lips. The pension, due to a former military doctor, allowed him to stay afloat. But Emiliano understood. He needed to return to peaceful life, look for work, somehow settle in, otherwise he could go crazy from idleness. Only first he wanted to see his daughter. Perhaps his late wife's parents had realized that the girl needed to communicate with her father. Maybe over these years they had come to their senses, forgiven their son-in-law. Emiliano went to the familiar address. Only completely different people lived there now. They said that the owners had hastily sold them the house because they were preparing to move to another city. Where? The new owners of the house didn't know. So that's how it was. Paloma's relatives must have also found it hard to stay in the city. They decided to go somewhere, and they took Isabella away. Emiliano decided for himself that he would definitely find them someday. But for now he needed to get a job. Work distracts, gives oblivion. Besides, he was a doctor. His purpose was to save people. These skills shouldn't go to waste. Emiliano was hired at the very hospital from which he had once quit. Again he operated, again felt needed. Work healed his soul. Patients and colleagues gave him a sense of usefulness. Sometimes it seemed to Emiliano that he was living an ordinary life, like all people. But periodically these dreams and memories came, about service and about Paloma. It was Friday evening. No need to work the next day. No particular business. All his friends had scattered to different places, and Emiliano couldn't bear this. Free time alone. These moments of complete silence, the man already knew that soon heavy thoughts would flood his head. He sought salvation, and therefore set off late at night away from home. Where? At the moment when Emiliano was leaving the apartment, he himself didn't know yet, just not to remain alone with dark, exhausting thoughts. Emiliano walked a little along the city's main street. On the eve of weekends, it always looked as if it was the height of some holiday. Elegant, cheerful youth, parents and grandparents with joyful children. People were walking. Tomorrow was Saturday. No one had to go to work or school. Beautiful. Emiliano even caught the general upbeat mood. He liked this. It felt good to feel like part of a colorful, cheerful crowd. Soon it got completely dark. His feet led Emiliano to some bar. He had never been here before. Well, it was time to fix that. Inside, it turned out to be quite cozy. Live music, clean tables, soft, comfortable armchairs for guests instead of the usual wooden chairs. Emiliano chose a place in the corner, away from others. He sat at a small single table, ordered drinks. Today, he intended to get rid of bad thoughts with the help of strong drinks. When consciousness is clouded, it becomes a little easier. Another thing is that it will be even worse later. Dark thoughts will return. They will spin in his buzzing head and remind him of the past. But that will happen in the morning. And anyway, the main thing is not now. Strong rum did its job. Gradually, feelings dulled. His head cleared. Emiliano listened with genuine pleasure to the performances of the local rock band. Young guys, energetic, full of hopes for a bright future, confident in themselves. They definitely hadn't had time to do anything yet that would make them feel constant guilt. There were many visitors in the bar. Mostly people came in couples or small groups. They laughed, talked, joked. Around there was a pleasant hum, sounds of peaceful, quiet life. Emiliano felt a little foreign here, as if pretending, trying to seem like everyone else. A couple more glasses of rum, and Emiliano stopped worrying about anything at all. Tomorrow would bring retribution for this temporary oblivion. But that was tomorrow, and now Emiliano felt almost good. A woman's voice and someone's touch persistently pulled the man out of pleasant stupor. Emiliano turned toward the unexpected interference and met the gaze of gray, wide-open eyes framed by black eyelashes. "I'm asking, are you all right?" Obviously, the girl who had at some point sat down at Emiliano's table was repeating her question not for the first time. Strange. When did she appear nearby? And most importantly, why? "I'm perfectly fine," Emiliano nodded. Of course, he wasn't going to share details of his life with a stranger. And what for? "It's just that you look very unhappy and lonely. I've been watching you for a long time already and, it seemed to me you need help." Emiliano looked closely at the girl. Tall, slender, pleasant facial features, beautiful chestnut hair flowing over graceful shoulders, young, clearly about 5 years younger than him. Eyes gray, alluring, a little anxious. Emiliano caught her gaze. So sincere, so caring. "Thank you very much," Emiliano smiled warmly. "But I'm really fine." "That's good," the girl nodded. "But can I just sit here with you?" "Of course you can," the man nodded. "Moreover, I'll even enjoy it. Only now it's my turn to ask. Are you all right? Did something happen?" "What happened is that I constantly choose the wrong men. And today again. Another disappointment. He invited me on a date to a cafe, and then his wife showed up and made such a scene. And she yelled at me as if I were some kind of fallen woman. But I didn't know he was married. I didn't even suspect. You can't imagine how ashamed I was. I literally ran away from that cafe. I decided to go to a bar, at least distract myself a little, and here you are." Yes, quite a situation. Emiliano looked at the girl with sympathy. He liked her more and more. Sincere, lively, sensitive, warm. Such people are rare these days. And look at that. How unlucky she really is with guys. "So can I sit here with you? It's just hard to be alone somehow. You, it seems to me, could also use company." "Sit, of course, and let's switch to you. What will you have? Rum, whiskey, maybe wine or beer?" "Just juice. I don't drink at all. I feel bad after." Emiliano smiled. "Cute." He called the waiter, ordered juice for his companion. They talked about something. something abstract. They discussed movies, plans for the future. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation, Emiliano suddenly realized that he had never introduced himself, and he forgot to ask his companion's name. This seemed funny to both of them. They laughed merrily. It turned out the girl's name was Adriana. They were surprisingly good together. Maybe the alcohol contributed to this, or the situation itself was conducive. Either way, Emiliano didn't think about the reasons, but simply enjoyed the pleasant moments. Even then he understood that he didn't want to part with Adriana, but at the same time had no right to keep her. This was selfish. What could he offer her? His fate was too complicated. It wasn't worth dragging someone else into this. But Adriana, she herself strived for closeness. Emiliano saw the girl was charmed by him, and he didn't understand what could have hooked this beauty. He was lost in guesses. "You must have a very interesting life," the girl said, looking at Emiliano. "There's some kind of wisdom in your eyes." "Sorry, I can't help but ask. You're not married by any chance?" "It's just that after today's incident, I ask everyone this question. Forgive me." "No, not married," Emiliano shook his head negatively. He almost added that he was once married, then held back. These details weren't needed now. "Who would need someone like me? You know, Adriana, no one loves me at all." Emiliano said these words and was surprised himself. But it was true. No one loved him. But there were people somewhere who felt burning hatred toward him. These were Paloma's parents and his own daughter, who, of course, was raised in an atmosphere of contempt and disgust for her father. And they did right. He deserved it. "That can't be." Adriana's beautiful gray eyes opened even wider. "You're very handsome and smart, and in general, for some reason, I feel so good with you." Emiliano felt pleasant warmth envelop his heart. How long had he not felt anything like this? Adriana, she was somehow special. In the morning, Emiliano woke up in his bed, dressed. His head was buzzing. Everything was clear. Yesterday, he overdid it in the bar. Somehow he got home, collapsed in what he was wearing. How he even made it to bed. He remembered the pleasant girl he had communicated with the night before. Probably he got drunk, showed himself in all his glory, and this girl, Adriana, understood who was in front of her and regretted those pleasant words she had said to him. Emiliano remembered everything. He remembered how Adriana called him good, smart, handsome. Suddenly the sound of water came from the kitchen. Emiliano perked up. What was this? Was he not alone in the apartment? The man got up and went toward the sound. The sight that met his eyes was so unexpected that the man was stunned for several moments. Adriana was bustling around in the kitchen. She was wearing his checkered shirt, which reached to the middle of her thighs. The girl looked simply stunning. "Oh, you're awake?" The guest smiled somewhat embarrassedly. "And I'm making us breakfast here. You don't mind?" Emiliano shook his head negatively and sat at the table, as if it should be so, as if every day a beautiful girl with gray, clear eyes was discovered in his kitchen. "I drank a little too much yesterday," Emiliano finally began. "I don't remember anything at all. How did we end up here? What happened at all?" "Well, yes, you overdid it," Adriana smiled, sitting down next to him. "I couldn't let you go alone like that. Especially since you opened your soul to me. You didn't tell any details, but you made me understand how bad and scared you feel. I couldn't abandon you, so I accompanied you. Spent the night here, on your couch in the living room. You don't mind, do you?" "No, of course not," Emiliano assured. "That's excellent," Adriana smiled. "Now we'll have breakfast and I'll go home." Then there was breakfast. Aromatic scrambled eggs, fresh coffee. The awkwardness that had arisen in the morning disappeared. Emiliano and Adriana again communicated as if they had known each other all their lives. In reality, they knew nothing about each other at all. And Emiliano, who didn't want to let Adriana go at all, decided to fix this. He began asking her questions. He was really interested in everything about her. What he heard shocked the man to his core. He thought that Adriana was quite a prosperous girl who had everything good in her life. But it turned out nothing good had happened. Adriana was raised by her mother. She never knew her father. Her mother, as long as Adriana could remember, constantly tried to arrange her personal life. It worked out with varying success. Periodically, Adriana would get another stepfather. These were different people. Some paid no attention to the girl, and some tried to educate her. sometimes with quite harsh methods. Her mother approved and supported any actions of her new man. Once, Adriana was finishing school then. Her mother brought home Osvaldo, a heavy, rude man with an amazingly evil and tenacious gaze. He frightened Adriana, frightened her to icy goosebumps down her spine. But her mother doted on the new suitor. And why wouldn't she? He worked as a long-distance trucker, brought a lot of money home. He didn't deny her mother anything. Adriana immediately didn't like how he looked at her. An attentive, studying, sticky, intrusive gaze. Adriana caught it on herself every time she found herself alone at home with her stepfather. The girl thought about running away, but where? They had no relatives. She couldn't go to the street. It was peaceful only in those moments when Osvaldo went on a trip. Then Adriana breathed freely and rested from the intrusive attention of another stepfather. Time passed. The girl entered university, chose a profession she had long dreamed of: translator. Everything in her life seemed to be going well, but then Osvaldo moved from sticky glances to actions. Apparently, he decided that his stepdaughter was already adult enough. She had celebrated her coming of age. Now he could treat her like an adult. When mother wasn't there, he came to my room, grabbed me, forced himself on me. I barely escaped then. He promised me money, promised to buy everything I could want. Then he threatened. In general, I ran away from the apartment, in what I was wearing, and returned there only once later, when I knew for sure Osvaldo was on a trip, to take documents and things. Mother even yelled at me, accused me of wanting to steal her man, said I wasn't her daughter. Emiliano saw that Adriana was barely holding back tears. She hadn't fully processed all the nightmares she had to endure. Emiliano allowed himself to hug the girl. She seemed to need just that. Adriana pressed against him, as if seeking protection, and Emiliano suddenly felt strong, almost omnipotent. At that moment came understanding. He would never leave her, and wouldn't let anyone else hurt her. In general, Adriana then had to leave home and break ties with her mother. She could no longer live under the same roof with Osvaldo. The girl dropped out of university. It was hard to combine study and work, and she had to work a lot. How else to pay for rented housing, food, clothing? First, I went to work as a salesperson in a supermarket. Then one of the customers offered me to work as an administrator in his beauty salon. He said my appearance was suitable, my smile friendly. In general, I work there now. The money's good, I like the work itself. I'm even thinking about continuing my studies. I just can't get myself together. No one will hurt you anymore, I promise. This was probably the most amazing story of acquaintance that Emiliano had ever known. A chance meeting in a bar, then this morning conversation in the kitchen, and both suddenly decided they didn't want to part anymore. Adriana moved in with Emiliano. The more they got to know each other, the clearer they understood that they had met, as banal as it sounds, their other half. Emiliano was honest with Adriana, honest to the end. He told her about himself, about Paloma, about his in-laws who had taken his daughter somewhere, about the hardships of service, about the difficult adaptation to ordinary life. Emiliano supposed that Adriana would be scared and think about whether she needed a relationship with such a complicated person. But she hugged him tightly, felt sorry for him. "So that's why you sometimes sleep so restlessly. And I thought your past wouldn't let you go." Adriana believed that Emiliano deserved a new life. Calm, happy, not burdened by the weight of the past. You're not guilty of that accident, but the person who got behind the wheel of a truck, drunk and violated all the rules. And you've saved so many lives in the operating room and continue to save them. You're the best person I know. Next to Adriana, Emiliano's soul healed. The past never completely let go, but living became clearly more pleasant and happier with Adriana's appearance in it. Emiliano thanked fate for that chance meeting in the bar. Look at that. Completely strange people somehow cross paths, met, and now make each other happy. Adriana, reliable, sincere, loving, beautiful, understanding. Sometimes it seemed to Emiliano as if Adriana could read his thoughts. She felt him so subtly. He helped his beloved realize her longtime dream, to study to become a translator. He simply took her to the dean's office one day. Everything was arranged with the rector in advance. Adriana finished her studies externally, 2 courses in a year. She got her diploma and even got a job in her specialty. Her happiness knew no bounds. They got married. They simply decided one day that it was time to legalize their harmonious and already time-tested relationship. They flew off on an unforgettable honeymoon trip. Emiliano chose the luxurious resort Cancun. The newlyweds lived in a bungalow located right on the water. In the mornings, they dove into the warm, pleasant water from the porch of their little house. Almost immediately upon returning from the trip, Adriana announced that she was expecting a child. Emiliano was delighted. Of course he was delighted. They both wanted this so much. But at the same time, anxious thoughts returned. Where was his daughter, who was already quite grown up? How was she living now? Could a person become a good father when his older child undoubtedly hated him? Adriana understood her husband's anxieties, calmed him, assured him that everything would be fine, and even confessed that she herself was afraid of motherhood. I have very bad relations with my mother, and no normal model of behavior. Will I manage? Won't I repeat her mistakes? Adriana always supported Emiliano in his desire to find his daughter, or at least learn about her fate. The man repeatedly contacted the police, but they always refused him. Officially, he was no longer the girl's father, because he himself had written the renunciation. Private detectives didn't help either. Apparently, his father-in-law, when taking his family away from the city, had covered his tracks well. He probably even changed his surname and did something with documents. He so much didn't want to see Emiliano anymore that he decided on such complications. He would definitely have enough money for such things, and his father-in-law also had connections. Finding his daughter, this task now seemed almost impossible. And yet Emiliano didn't give up. He understood. There would be no peace for him until he learned how his child was living. And Paloma, who often appeared to Emiliano in his dreams, she looked at him with silent reproach. Emiliano somehow understood. This wasn't because of the accident. Paloma blamed him for not being near their daughter. Then twins were born, Santiago and Catalina. Adriana and Emiliano threw themselves headfirst into the joys and cares of parenthood. Emiliano perceived this as a priceless gift, as a miracle. Looking at the babies, he always smiled, and their smiles made him the happiest person in the world. Adriana, despite her fears, turned out to be a wonderful mother. The appearance of children increased the love between the spouses many times over, and everything seemed to be good. But these dreams... "Were you there again? In the hot spot?" Adriana clarified. Emiliano nodded his head. For some reason, he didn't want to tell the truth now. He felt that his pillow was soaked with sweat. Paloma still stood before his eyes. In her gaze was no longer anxiety, but real panic. And Emiliano knew what the matter was. This was his subconscious raging, protesting against the fact that he still hadn't found his older daughter. Having become a father again, Emiliano fully realized how much attention, care, and love children need. And near his daughter all these years, there was neither mother nor father. There were, of course, other relatives who cared for her. Isabella lived in the family of her childless aunt, who desperately dreamed of a child. Surely she was well off. And yet, in the morning, everything was as always. Emiliano was getting ready for work. Adriana at this time was already feeding the awakened twins. The babies sat in their high chairs, eagerly devouring sweet porridge. Looking at their smudged, cheerful faces, it was impossible to suppress a smile. Today promised to be a difficult day. Emiliano was called to a consultation at a hospital located in a neighboring city, a complex case. It was necessary to decide whether an operation was possible or whether it was better to choose another path for maintaining the patient's life. Emiliano had to spend the whole day in another city. First the consultation, then he was asked to consult local surgeons on several more questions. Emiliano was returning closer to evening. He drove his car along the deserted highway, admiring the views. On both sides of the road stretched hills covered with cacti and sparse trees, a typical Mexican landscape. The sky was overcast, rain was gathering. Clouds were thickening very quickly. There would probably be a thunderstorm. Emiliano liked such weather, when the heat of the day was replaced by the freshness of pouring rain. He even opened the windows to let cool air into the cabin. Here the first drops of rain drummed on the roof. A dull rumble of thunder sounded, wind rose. It was good to sit at such a moment in the car cabin and observe what was happening through the window. But those who were now without shelter were having a hard time. Rain poured as if from a bucket. The wind intensified. And suddenly Emiliano didn't even believe his own eyes at first. By the road under a sparse tree, he noticed a fragile figure. Maybe it seemed so. And yet Emiliano stopped on the shoulder and looked back. No, really. Standing under the tree was a thin girl in a completely soaked dress. In her hands she held something heavy. A bag, perhaps, a travel bag. How did she end up here, far from human habitation in such weather? The stranger clearly needed help. Without thinking for a second, Emiliano got out of the car and hurried to that very tree under which the girl was trying to shelter. When he approached closer, he couldn't believe his eyes. The stranger was holding not a large travel bag at all, but a child, a baby who apparently had barely turned 1 year old. He was about the same age as the twins. "Miss, get in the car quickly. You'll get soaked yourself and give the child a cold. What are you doing so far away with a baby alone?" Reproach sounded in Emiliano's voice, which made him ashamed. This girl, she was still quite young, almost a child. Who knows what situation she had gotten into? And here was a strict uncle with his moralizing. "Thank you," the girl mumbled. They ran to the car in the pouring rain. The young woman had managed to get soaked through. She covered the baby with her denim jacket, so the child, a boy, was almost unharmed. Emiliano pulled a roll of paper napkins from the glove compartment. There was nothing else suitable in the car. "At least dry yourself a little. You're soaked through. I'll turn on the air conditioning now. You'll warm up quickly." "Thank you," the girl repeated, and immediately began blotting her face and long wet hair with paper towels. The baby watched his mother with curiosity, or maybe his sister after all. Fortunately, he didn't look frightened. "Funny guy," Emiliano smiled. "I have children the same age, twins." "Great," the girl nodded. She was looking intently at her rescuer's face. It seemed that what she saw surprised her, or frightened her. "Don't worry," Emiliano caught himself. "I just want to help you. Don't be afraid of me. I couldn't drive past a girl with a child who found themselves by the road during a thunderstorm. By the way, how did this happen?" "I came by bus to a settlement not far from here. Then I wanted to get to the city by hitchhiking, got confused about the road, got lost, well, and got caught in the rain." "So you need to get to the city?" "Yeah, I'm just going there. I'll give you a ride." "Excellent. Thank you very much." Emiliano started the engine. The car moved off. The man turned on cheerful music. Sometimes through the rear-view mirror, he glanced at his strange passengers. The girl was silent, pressing the baby to herself, and he smiled and looked around with curious little eyes. "Your little brother? My son. And where in the city?" "What address?" The girl hesitated and then answered, "I don't know yet." "How is that? Did some trouble happen to you? Where are you from and who are you going to?" "I came to my father," the girl answered after hesitating. "But I lost the address, and the phone too. My phone was stolen on the bus. We'll stop somewhere. It's nothing." "Where will you stop?" Emiliano clarified. He had already noticed that the girl had no bag with her. "Do you at least have money?" "No," the passenger sighed, pressing the child even closer to herself. "I'm telling you, everything was stolen on the bus." "So here's what," Emiliano declared decisively. "You're coming with me. We'll figure out what to do next there. If you know your father's name and surname, we'll find him quickly. But for now, you need to stop somewhere, rest." "No, what are you saying?" the girl protested. "Not up for discussion. Think about the child. Where are you going with him at night? By the way, what's the boy's name?" "Diego." "Diego then," Emiliano smiled. "So here's what. We're going to my place. Diego won't be bored. He'll find company there. You'll tell everything in detail there, and we'll decide what to do." "Really?" The girl's eyes looked at Emiliano with hope. He suddenly understood that this young mother had no one to help her at all. In the whole big city, it seemed, she had no one, and she had gotten into a difficult situation. "Well, how can you pass by? Especially with a baby?" Adriana met the guest with a smile on her face. If she was surprised, she didn't show this emotion at all. She behaved as if it was normal. to receive completely soaked young unknown mothers with babies. Come in, make yourselves comfortable. I'll find something for you to change into now. By happy coincidence, we'll also find clothes for the baby. Adriana disappeared into the bedroom, and Emiliano and the stranger remained in the living room. The girl looked around with interest. She was especially interested in the photographs in frames on the walls and table. She examined them with great curiosity. Emiliano watched her and didn't know where to start the conversation. He wanted to find out what had happened to this girl, to understand how and with what to help her. That she was in trouble was beyond doubt. How old was she? At most 18, maybe even less. And already a child. Why was no one near them? What kind of father was this that she was so striving toward? How had he allowed such a thing? You have a very beautiful place, the girl smiled. She bent down to seat the baby on the sofa. She was probably tired of holding him in her arms. At this moment, a photograph suddenly fell out of the pocket of her wet jeans. Emiliano instinctively bent down to pick it up and return it to its owner, and was stunned. The snapshot captured his family. No, not the one he had now. Another family from his past life. He, Paloma, and little Isabella, happily hugging both parents around their necks. Emiliano looked at the girl, who, noticing that he had seen the photograph, froze in place. Light blue eyes, chestnut wavy hair, and a mole above her lip. Isabella, is that you? The girl shrugged her shoulders with a chill and nodded. At this moment, Adriana entered the room. In her hands, she held a bathrobe and a huge terry towel. Well then, and now you need to take a warm bath. Don't worry, we'll look after the baby. We know how to do that. We learned over the past year. Noticing the expression on her husband's and the guests' faces, Adriana stopped short. What's happening? And then there was a long conversation. Isabella, and it turned out to be exactly her, didn't go to take a warm bath right away. She simply wrapped herself in a blanket, because this conversation couldn't wait. They sat on the sofa, 3 adults and a baby, who fell asleep almost immediately, tired by the events of the long day. Isabella spoke. Adriana and Emiliano carefully caught every word, not interrupting, not asking questions. Isabella remembered little about the time when she lived with mom and dad. Smiles, hugs, some pleasant sensations remained in her memory. Then everything changed. Absolutely everything. Instead of mom and dad, Aunt Valeria and her husband, Uncle Felipe. Grandmother and grandfather became somehow different, strict, sad, and angry. As long as she could remember, they said bad words about her father, called him a scoundrel, a monster, and Isabella felt guilt before them. These people, they raised her, did so much for her, and she was all this time the daughter of a person they hated so much. In theory, Isabella should have hated her father too. She honestly wanted this. It would have been easier for her to live in her family, but somehow it didn't work out. She still wanted to see him, talk to him, maybe go for a walk. The girl carefully hid these dreams of hers from relatives they wouldn't have approved. Sometimes Isabella generally suddenly began to think that it had always been so. Grandmother, grandfather, Aunt Valeria, that she had never had any other life, and only the photograph. The small snapshot that she once accidentally found in the family photo album reminded her of her real parents. No, there were many photos of mom in the house, but dad's grandfather had destroyed them all. Only this small family photograph had miraculously survived. Isabella found it and carefully kept it in secret places so that grandmother, grandfather, or Aunt Valeria wouldn't find and take it away. This was the only thing she had left in her memory of her father. Isabella missed her dad and mom, whom she hardly knew and didn't remember, but she didn't feel unhappy. She had everything she needed for a prosperous life. Aunt Valeria dressed Isabella up like a doll, took her to theaters, walked with her in the park. At the same time, Isabella felt herself more like a thing, an object of her aunt's pride. Grandmother and grandfather spoiled their granddaughter with gifts, took her to the sea. In general, Isabella lived quite well. And then everything changed again. Isabella was already a teenager then and understood much. Grandfather used to own a business. Then, when they moved to another city, he sold everything and invested the money received. At first, everything went well. capital grew, but suddenly something went wrong. In general, grandfather went bankrupt, and somehow everything broke at once, fell apart into pieces. Grandfather couldn't withstand such a shock. After all, he was already an elderly man. Heart attack. Doctors couldn't do anything. After this, grandmother became seriously ill. Aunt Valeria didn't want to care for her herself and therefore placed her mother in a nursing home. Grandmother didn't live there long. She faded away in a few months. Aunt Valeria and Uncle Felipe often quarreled and argued after grandfather's bankruptcy. Isabella, being still a child, understood perfectly well what the matter was. Uncle Felipe, he was with Valeria only because of her father's money. Now, when there was no money, Uncle Felipe showed his true face. Valeria and Felipe divorced. And then Valeria met a new person whose only condition was the absence of other people's children. So Isabella ended up in an orphanage. It was hard for her there, a home child, cruelty of caregivers and inmates, longing for relatives, unfair punishments. Isabella knew this was temporary and waited for coming of age, when she could finally return to grandfather and grandmother's apartment, which they had left her, and start living independently. Just before graduation, trouble happened to her. They had a physical education teacher with a bad reputation in the orphanage. Everything happened there by agreement, according to a worked-out scheme. He gave girls phones, money, expensive clothes, and they gave him their youth and beauty for temporary use. This person set his sights on Isabella. She understood what was what, and therefore tried to avoid even chance meetings with a physical education teacher. This, it seemed, only excited him more with the girl's inaccessibility. It seemed to him that this was part of the game. In general, everything happened one evening in his storage room. There was no one around. Isabella couldn't fight him off. And then it turned out that she was also expecting a child. Fortunately, graduation was not far off. Isabella barely endured until this moment. She literally fled from the orphanage, from the gray walls, indifference and anger, cruelty and injustice. She thought she would start a new life, give birth to a child. She never felt negative feelings toward the baby. On the contrary, she was even glad that now she wouldn't be alone. But then it turned out that somehow Aunt Valeria had managed to sell her parents' apartment, the one that was intended for Isabella. That is, the girl found herself without money, without a roof over her head, and also with a baby in her belly. There was nothing to do. She got a job as a janitor in the local management company. There they also provided her with a closet to live in. She worked until the very birth, no matter how hard it was. Then she went to a social shelter. They gave her a year to arrange her fate. Isabella calmly gave birth to the baby, named him Diego in honor of her unknown but beloved father. She thought about her father all this time. She looked at the photograph, imagined their meeting. The period of living in the social shelter was expiring. Isabella, of course, never found housing and work. How to do this without a penny to her name and with an infant in her arms? After the expiration of the period of stay in the social shelter, Diego would be taken to an orphanage. Isabella didn't even want to think about this. For her son to repeat her fate? Never in the world. And therefore, on a summer morning, she took her documents, gathered the child, and set off for the city where she was once born. She knew that her father still lived there, and even knew his former address. She once overheard a conversation between grandmother and grandfather, and remembered everything, even wrote it down. I was going to my father, only he could help me. I understood, of course, that this person might not want to see me. Grandfather said that he was bad, that he had renounced me, that I wasn't needed by him. But then why did he look for me? Why did he change all our surnames? Obviously, he was afraid that father would look for us. That is, he knew that father wasn't indifferent. He knew that I was needed by him. I can't believe this. Emiliano had difficulty finding words. Isabella, I now clearly see that it's you. I am your father. You understood this already? I understood long ago. Even there in the car, I recognized you. You haven't changed so much since this picture was taken. Well, and you've changed a lot, Emiliano smiled. You were a baby. You became a beautiful girl. You look very much like your mother. I know. Grandfather often told me so, and added that it was good that I didn't take after my father. Emiliano, obeying an impulse, pressed Isabella to himself, began stroking her still damp hair. The girl cried. She shuddered with her thin shoulders, sobbed like a small child. Adriana looked at Isabella with sympathy. Emiliano kept stroking his daughter's head. He said that now everything would be good, and in parallel, thought about the fact that it would be necessary to do renovation in one of the bedrooms. This would be a room for little Diego and his mother. Emiliano sat in the garden and watched three babies concentratedly building a sandcastle. Santiago, Catalina, and Diego, an inseparable, charming trio. Isabella was now studying at a pedagogical university. She chose such a specialty herself. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Adriana returned to work. Two nannies looked after the babies. Soon the kids would grow to the age when they could be sent to kindergarten. There was no necessity, but all three so strived for communication. They would definitely be good in kindergarten. Today, Emiliano had a day off, so he gladly played with the babies, children, and grandson. Look at that, grandson. The man still couldn't get used to the fact that he was a grandfather. But Adriana, on the contrary, now gladly called herself a grandmother. She was coquetting, of course. What kind of grandmother was she? Beautiful, young. Emiliano now felt truly happy, and these terrible, tormenting dreams, they had stopped. No, sometimes Paloma still came to him in dreams, but now she smiled, and this was very good.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.